Good afternoon, everyone. I was reflecting before I came here today that I think this is the 5th time now that I have offered this Mass for the beginning of the academic year. Should be the 6th time, but last year, COVID offered the homily, and not me. So I missed it. And it's amazing how fast things change in 2 years. Because for 4 years, I always remember the same group of guys who would be sitting here. They're gone now. They're all gone. And now I think about, too, this chapel. The chapel has completely changed since I was here last, too. It's like a miracle. So congratulations to you all for what you've done over this period of time. The gospel today is interesting. It's one of those gospels that makes you pause for a minute and think. Jesus does a great act. Heals a man who's been possessed forever and sends the demons away. And the people want him to go away as fast as possible. Get out of our community. It was not a popular thing to do. Why? Can you imagine, you all grew up, many of you, in farming communities. Could you imagine if somebody came in and possessed 2,000 heads of your cattle and they all threw over themselves over a cliff? You just wiped out an entire economy. These people didn't want him around. They wanted him to get out. But his point was, and I think it's an important point for all of us, sometimes to do what is right means that you have to do what is true. And to do what is true is not always popular. Sometimes you must make a very unpopular decision. I would dare say that today, to be a seminarian in the world we have is not necessarily a popular decision. In fact, if you're here because you want to be popular, I think you may want to look for a different job and a different vocation for the future. Because the job of a priest today is more difficult all the time. Ask any of these men here, any of us. It gets difficult every year. And it becomes more and more countercultural. It's not about popularity. It's about being truthful. It's about being committed to what is right and what is good. When I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about, I was thinking about the things I've said over the last years. And so I thought, this year I'm going to go in a little different direction. I'm going to still kind of give you a little bit of a motivational speech on what we need to be as seminarians, what we need to be as good priests for the future. But I'm going to base it more on philosophy. I hope Father Benny doesn't get upset with me, because I'm going to be talking about philosophy today, and I hope I do it correctly. And I want to talk to you about a very particular school of philosophy, which I always find interesting. In fact, I quoted it today in my speech to the bishops. I very much like to read the Stoics. And if you remember, the Stoics were those who believed in a very strict lifestyle. They were very, very austere. And they were very clear and blunt about what they believed was true and what they believed was not true. Stoicism was very important in the early church, in fact, so much so that the early monks, many of them, placed their whole rules around kind of a Stoic philosophy. They used that as the impetus for their philosophy. So today I want to talk to you about, not Zeno, that's one I talked about yesterday, which is also an important Stoic philosopher. And I was put it to the bishops that one important line we always have to remember from Zeno is that he used to always say, remember, we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Mainly we need to listen and not talk all the time. Today I'm going to talk to you about his best pupil. His name was Cleanthes. And Cleanthes was an interesting guy because he was not the most intelligent person in the world. In fact, his nickname was the donkey. No comment. But the reason they called him the donkey is because it took forever for him to grasp a concept. But even Zeno said about him that he was like a stone tablet. That it took forever to etch a word into the tablet, but that once it was etched there, it stayed forever. And this is how he was. Once he learned something and incorporated something, he never forgot it. And he was a great teacher. He was so devoted that he would spend his entire days going to lessons and lectures, or giving lessons and lectures, and then at night he hauled water for rich people. That's how he supported himself, was by hauling water. He gives us 4 ways to live that are very important. And that's what I want to share with you today. I think that they are something that we can reflect on easy, and they're simple. The first one is courage. He says that we must be courageous. The second one is justice. The third is simplicity. And the fourth is wisdom. He said these are the 4 key points to a virtuous life. Courage, justice, simplicity, and wisdom. Now, courage. Boy, do we need courageous people today. Do we need courageous Christians today? Do we need courageous priests and religious today? I'm afraid that we are not as courageous as we used to be. Think of those missionaries who gave up everything to come here to places they didn't know, suffering from all sorts of hardship, especially from sickness, and yet they stayed and they passed on the good news with great hardship. Today we have our own things. I mean, to stand up and to preach the truth, to talk about the teaching of the church, to talk about our views on things like homosexuality or sexuality in general, or to talk about our views on birth control, or to talk about our views on certain issues will get you canceled immediately. Try putting it on social media. They'll block you tomorrow. So what? Don't be afraid to get canceled. Don't be afraid to be blocked. It is better to tell the truth than to make people happy by telling a lie. We must be courageous. Another thing, one of the things that kind of bothered me during this whole COVID-19, I mean, we were all worried about COVID-19, we were all fearful, but I think a lot of, even our brother priests, took it as an excuse to be lazy, to crawl under their tables and hide. They were not the courageous witnesses that we should have been. We were also frontline workers. We needed to be on those front lines. With safety, with precaution, and with always following the instructions of the medical people. But when we were called to help, we needed to be there. Be courageous. The second point is related to courage. And that's the point of justice. As Christians, as seminarians especially, as priests, we must always be just. Always be just. And we must always be merciful. Mercy and justice go hand in hand for us. You can't have one without the other. But at the same time, when we see things in the world which we know are unjust, when we see people being treated poorly, when we see women, gender abuse is a huge problem in this part of the world. When we see women being abused, we must speak out about it. We must be the first ones to speak out about it. And we must challenge people. Challenge them in their face if you have to. You need to do that. This is not correct. We cannot tolerate this as Christians. We need to be men and women of justice. Justice for the poor. It's not right that people are being... This part of the world, this is a real justice issue right now, even with COVID-19. Why did we have to wait so long to get vaccine? Why? Because we're not rich? Because we're not white? Because we're not Western? Why did we have to wait so long? This is a justice issue. We should speak out about these things. So always be men and women of justice. We must be just people. The next point, and this is a point that's a little more difficult sometimes, and that's simplicity. Now, what does simplicity mean exactly? First of all, we need to shun materialism. It's very difficult. It's very easy, even as a priest, especially a priest, to get caught up in materialism. Ah, I want the nice car. Ooh, I want that nice car there. Ooh, I have to talk to the bishop to make sure I get that Toyota. Why does he have that one and I don't? You can get caught up, attached to material things. I want the best rectory. I want my house to be nice. Ooh, I gotta have that new television. There was a famous story about a priest in Virtuous. It's very funny. He was kind of acting up. And so the bishop decided to send him to a really poor place out in the middle of the bush to teach him a lesson. So he sent him out there. Ooh, the priest did great. He was doing all sorts of work. He was working with the youth. He started a soccer club. He started to help with the Daughters of St. Anne. He was doing everything. So the people were so happy. They came to the bishop and said, listen, we really want to do something for Father. He's living so poor. We want to buy him a big screen television, and we want to get him cable television. We want to get him DSTV. The bishop said, well, you know, he has really worked hard. That's a good, yes, go ahead. They bought it for him, and they never saw him since. We must strive to be simple. People notice if you live a simple life. And even more so, people notice if you don't. They watch their priests. They watch the seminarians. They know if they're living simply. Another thing to live simply is that we have to be careful about not being prideful. You know, most of the time, a lot of times, you will go back to a community and you may be the most educated man in your community when you get to a small place because you've been in seminary for years. You have a very good education. You very well could be the most. Do not give in to intellectual pride. Don't make people feel stupid. There's nothing worse than a priest who makes someone else feel stupid. Don't do it. Be where they are. Live where they are. Learn to speak where they are. We were all there once. And we've been given a great gift in the education we've given. So share it in a proper way, but never in a prideful way. Also, always be approachable. Don't be men who are just a little above everyone else. Be approachable. It's important after Mass to stay out after Mass and greet the people. That means a lot to people. You know, you can change a person's life by a couple of words. I'm praying for you. It's so important for people to hear that. So always make yourself available and always be approachable. Finally, the last point that Cleanthes made, which I think also applies to our lives, is that we must be wise. Now, what is wisdom? Wisdom is a lot different than intelligence. How many of us have known people, it may have been our go-go or some kind of, our grandmothers or grandfathers, they had no formal education, but they were extremely wise people. My grandfather was a farmer his whole life, and he had one-liners that could make any philosopher put his head down and walk away in shame, because he was so smart. Remember one thing he used to always tell us, never fear the man that talks, fear the man that listens. Very wise. A very wise thing. Be men of wisdom and realize that it's not intelligence. What wisdom is oftentimes is what we call horse sense. It's the common thing that we learned. It's what we learned from our grandmothers, our grandfathers, from our parents, what we learned from those people around us, people who had a great sense and experience in their life. It comes from being with other people. That's something I think what Pope Francis is saying is when he says we need to smell like the sheep. He's saying we need to be with other people. We need to let their good sense rub off on us. We talk about in theology the sensus fidei or the sensus fidelium. The bishop talked about it today in his thing, and I talked about it as well. That really is talking about the good sense of the church. There's also good sense in the church. We know what is right and we know what is not right. We have prudent knowledge, practical knowledge. So be men of prudence when you're here. It's good to be careful. It's good to judge things. And it's good to think in a practical and common sense way. So those are my 4 points. The 4 points of Cleanthes. Courage, justice, simplicity, and wisdom. In some ways, I think it's interesting. If he would have been born just a few centuries later, there's no doubt he probably would have been saint. Because the things he offers us are also the same things that Jesus Christ tells us every day. It's what we saw in the gospel today. When our Lord worked in a very practical and a very courageous way. He didn't want to be popular. He wanted to be courageous. He did what was just. He lived simply. And he offered us great wisdom. So God bless you all, and I hope you have a very blessed and productive year. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen.